One flake of gray paint beat 5 years of theories. A free fall can't carve straight, parallel grooves across a rear bumper, but a push can. Tonight, the metal, not the rumors, tells exactly what happened. The first sign that something was wrong was not a scream, a crash, or a broken branch. It was a phone that kept ringing in a quiet kitchen and no one answering on the other end. In a small house in Ellensburg, Sarah stood by the sink with her husband Mark. 2 mugs sat on the counter. Steam rose from the kettle. A simple note was stuck to the fridge with a polka dot magnet. Back tomorrow after breakfast, 1 night only. R. R was for Ramon Vega, Sarah's closest friend since middle school. He had taken his 9-year-old niece Tessa for a 1-night camping trip. They weren't going far. It was supposed to be easy, an open turnout near the river, a small tent, a quick dinner, and home by morning. At 9:03 p.m., Sarah called. It went to voicemail. She tried again, then again. "It's probably bad signal," Mark said softly. "They're up in the hills." Sarah nodded, but her face stayed tight. "He always texts," she said. "Even just a thumbs up." She sent a message. "All good?" No response. At 9:11 p.m., she tried once more. Voicemail. She stared at the screen, then at the note on the fridge. Ramon was careful. He was the kind of person who brought extra headlamps, folded paper maps just right, and always told someone when he'd be back. He taught Tessa to coil a rope and to stamp out a fire until the coals sighed. Rain began to tap the windows. The house felt too still. "Let's go," Mark said at last. They put on coats and grabbed a flashlight. The highway shined black with rain. They drove through curves and dips, the wipers beating time. The foothills rose like dark shoulders. When the pavement turned to gravel, the truck hummed low. Trees closed in at the edges of the road. Ramon had texted coordinates earlier that day. They turned onto a narrow spur and rolled into a clearing. It was empty. No truck, no tent, no cooler, no chairs, no purple backpack with space patches. The place looked clean. Too clean, like a table wiped and left bare. Sarah swept her light across the ground. There were darker rectangles where tires had sat, and 2 thin drag marks that stopped at nothing. "If they left, there should be something," Mark said softly. "A wrapper, a footprint." There was nothing. They turned around and drove back through the night, the road feeling longer than before. By midnight, they were at the county sheriff's office, telling a tired deputy about unanswered calls, an empty campsite, and the feeling that something was very wrong. At dawn, the search began. Volunteers in orange vests formed lines and walked through the trees, calling names into the green. A helicopter pulsed over ridges and river bends. Someone taped a map to the hood of a truck and drew grids with a black marker. A K-9 team worked along the access road. The day moved forward fast and slow at the same time. People carried radios, water bottles, and hope. They found nothing. The foothills around the notches were a maze. Forest Service roads twisted and crossed like lines on a hidden map. Some went somewhere. Some went nowhere. The helicopter scanned for breaks in the canopy. A glint of metal, anything straight in a world full of shapes. If a truck had tumbled down a slope, there should have been torn brush, cut earth, a scar. There wasn't. The teams widened the search. More maps, more lines, more calls into quiet. Sarah and Mark waited at the command post under a pop-up tent that flapped in the wind. Coffee heated in a steel pot. No one drank much of it. On the 4th day, a team found tire marks near a steep bank where the river turned dark and deep. The tracks matched a mid-size pickup. Everyone gathered, and a dive team set lines to trees. The water was cold enough to bite through neoprene. Visibility was like fog underwater. Divers moved by feel, reading rock like braille. Sonar found a heavy shape. Hope rose like a breath held too long. A crane on a barge lifted metal out of the water. It wasn't a truck. It was a pile of old appliances, rusted fridges, broken stoves, a water heater jammed with stones. Someone had been using this pool as a dump. The tire tracks were from dumpers, not Ramon. A wave of disappointment moved through the team. People rubbed their necks, looked at the river, and said nothing. They tried another stretch. Nothing. They checked ravines. Nothing. The days kept going until fall came early and the passes got snow. The sheriff's office scaled back the search. The case stayed open, but the calls grew less frequent. People brought casseroles because that's what people do when they want to help and don't know how. The food cooled in the fridge. The note on the door faded around the edges. Tessa's purple backpack stayed by a chair leg, exactly where she had left it. The astronaut patch grinned with a faded smile. The phone still sat on the counter every night. Some nights it felt like a stone. Some nights it felt like a promise. A year passed, then 2, then 3. Not finding became part of life. The maps went into a milk crate. The radio numbers became familiar like old songs. 4 years. 5. People stopped asking out loud, but they still looked at the ridgeline when they drove past and thought, where? The person who found the clue wasn't a deputy, a diver, or a hunter. He was a wingsuit flyer named Nolan who came to the Cascades for wind and steep stone. He liked quiet cliffs no one wrote about. Decade in guidebooks. He hiked alone with a small pack and a camera clipped to his helmet. On a blue morning in late July, he stood at the edge of a granite wall and tested the wind with his cheek. He zipped his suit and stepped into the open air. The sound hit like a wall. He shaped himself and flew along the rock, close enough to see little shelves of grass in cracks. The valley below turned from smear to detail. He moved like a blade slipping through air. He saw it in a blink, white and rust, and an angle that didn't belong. It was not a log, not a rock. It was a shape with lines in a place that was all curves. He couldn't turn to it without risking his life. He kept his line, deployed his chute, and landed in a dry fan of gravel at the base. He unclipped, sat on a stone, and rolled back the footage on his camera. He scrubbed slowly and paused, zoomed in. The pixels pulled apart, then settled. It was a truck on a little ledge halfway down the cliff. The cab was crushed. The paint was burned brown with rust. A strip of torn blue fabric hung from metal like a ribbon fighting the wind. The ledge was too narrow to park on. No road reached it. No tow truck could. Nolan marked the spot on a map. He took a screenshot. He looked up at the granite wall, trying to see where the ledge sat relative to the top. Then he drove until he found a town with a sheriff's office and a person behind a window who would listen. He told his story twice. They watched the video 3 times. Someone called the county. Someone called the rope team. Back on the ridge, people drilled anchors into the rock and clipped ropes with hands that had done this before and knew what could go wrong. The wind pushed and let go. The first climber went over the edge slowly, testing each foot, each hold. He reached the ledge and stood on grass no one had stepped on for years. The truck lay on its side like a broken animal. The sun warmed the metal skin, but under his palm it felt cold in a way that made him shiver. The rope tech set webbing around frame metal that still felt strong enough to hold weight. He brushed dirt off the dash and found the VIN plate stamped into a thin rectangle of steel. He read the numbers up to the ridge over the radio. In a tent, someone typed the sequence and waited. The answer came back. It matched Ramon Vega's truck. The color had changed on the registration. White, not the original red. But the VIN was the same. This was the truck no one could find for 5 years. They worked the crushed cab carefully with a small metal saw. The blade whined high and thin. They removed sections like surgeons who didn't want to damage the patient. Inside they found leaves, a small nest, old foam, and a coin. They found a strip of blue fabric, likely from a tent or a jacket. They did not find bodies. Not in the cab, not under the cab, not on the ledge. The air felt different after that. No bodies meant the truck had not gone over with people inside. It meant it had been sent over empty. On the ridge above, the team found a rough service road that ran close to the cliff. It was narrow and dusty, lined with scrub and low brush. It led to a gray tower with dishes aimed at horizon lines. The road wasn't on any normal map. The people who used it were not campers. They were utility crews with keys and job codes. A heavy helicopter came when the wind behaved, thumping the air hard enough to make shirts flutter. The rope techs clipped slings to the frame and stepped away. The helicopter lifted slowly. The truck rose, dipped, swayed, and then moved up and away in a long arc. As it swung across open space, the lead tech saw deep, horizontal gouges on the rear, long, parallel scratches cut into the metal like straight scars. They weren't random. They ran level across the back. Inside the grooves were tiny flakes of paint. Industrial gray, not a car color. The kind used to protect, steel from weather and salt. He took photos from 3 angles and scraped paint into a paper envelope. The mountain returned to wind and light. The ledge was empty again, but the secret it had held was now sitting on a pad on the ridge under a blue tarp, waiting for the next step. In a bright lab room, a tech teased apart the paint flakes. The binder was epoxy, thick, hard, meant for heavy use in bad weather. The pigment mix matched industrial coatings, not standard automotive paints. Samples of the steel smear in the gouges pointed to a type of alloy used in strong bumper assemblies and push bars designed for work, not image. A fall doesn't draw straight lines across the rear of a truck. Gravity scrapes and tears, but it doesn't press parallel grooves into metal like a stamp. A push does, a long, level push. The detectives made a list of companies in the area that used that kind of paint on equipment and vehicles. The list was long until they filtered it with a better question. Who had access to that hidden service road above the cliff? Who had reason to be there at night? The list got short. Utilities, contractors, a handful of service crews. They pulled old GPS logs for utility fleet vehicles. At first, it looked impossible. The utility had replaced their tracking system years ago. But the old server still sat in a closet with blinking lights, plugged into nothing important. Someone powered it up and waited for it to remember its job. The screen filled with maps and dots. They filtered by date, by district, by badge number, then by truck. One service truck assigned to a technician named Cole Halprin showed a breadcrumb trail on the night Ramon and Tessa disappeared. The truck drove to the cliff road late. It idled at the exact spot above the ledge for 43 minutes. Then it left. Later that night, it stopped near the campsite turnout and sat for 3 minutes. The next morning, a maintenance record showed a bumper and push bar replacement on Cole's truck. Reason for damage, deer strike. No wildlife report number. The shop used the same gray epoxy paint listed in the lab report. Cole had worked for the utility for 12 years. His file was boring. On time, no complaints, no awards. He lived alone. He rented a small place near a field where people flew kites in spring. Through a shell company registered to a mailbox, he had leased an old pump station in the hills. Decommissioned, fenced, concrete buildings going to dust. On paper, the lease said, storage. In real life, no one who mattered ever went there. They went in before sunrise. The gate chain popped. The yard smelled like dry dirt. Inside, the old pump room was quiet, with tanks and pipes that had once pushed water to town. A long corridor swallowed their footsteps. The walls were gray and the air was cool. In the middle of that corridor was a door that didn't match the rest of the building. It was newer, set in crooked, painted to almost match the wall, but not quite. It had a lock that wasn't standard for public buildings. They breached the door. The air on the other side felt different, like a room with its own rules. It was clean, too clean. A small, bright space with a bed, a desk, shelves, and a hum in the corner that sounded like steady breathing. Books in neat rows. Toys arranged in a way that felt more like a display than play. A machine in the corner filtered air. The place looked like a life, but not a normal one. A girl sat on the bed with her feet touching, hands on her knees. She did not look at the team entering. She looked at the wall like it was telling her something. She was 12, thin, pale, very still. A negotiator spoke softly, the way you speak to someone waking from a long sleep. The girl turned her head, but not toward the voices. She looked at the door. She had the calm of someone who had learned that reacting brings consequences. They moved slow, They did not crowd her. They did not shout. They brought her outside. Warm air moved across her face. An EMT handed her water and waited for her to take it without pushing. In the lower level, officers found Cole near a service crawl, standing with a short length of pipe. He looked up, saw the team, and dropped the metal. He did not run. He did not argue. He did not speak. Later that day, dogs found disturbed soil in the woods near the campsite road. Under a shallow grave were bones and a torn piece of jacket. Dental records confirmed it was Ramon. The coroner said the blow to his head had been deliberate, likely at or near the campsite. He had been buried before the truck was pushed over the cliff. The case made a clear line. The ledge had held the truck for 5 years, hidden from the air by angle and from the ground by distance. The cab was empty. That alone said it wasn't an accident. The rear bumper had long, straight grooves filled with gray industrial paint. Lab results matched epoxy used on heavy equipment and push bars. The only road that could get close enough was a rough service track used by utility crews, not people out for a weekend camp. Fleet GPS logs, forgotten on an old server, showed a specific truck sitting at the exact clifftop spot for 43 minutes on the night they vanished. The next day, that same truck got a new bumper and push bar. The paperwork said deer. The paint on the truck that went over the cliff said something else. Cole's life looked simple from the outside. Work, home, eat alone, sleep, repeat. But the lease for the decommissioned pump station showed planning. The door built into the old corridor showed hands that knew tools. The small room behind the door showed routine, control, and isolation. The girl in the room had been shaped by those routines. She had learned not to cry, not to ask, not to expect a door to open. The day it did, she sat and waited for someone to tell her what to do next. Back at the sheriff's office, people who had worked the case from the beginning had different reactions. Relief, anger, a kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace. The rope techs who had stood on the ledge sat on the bumper of a truck and didn't talk for a while. The diver who had lifted dead appliances out of the river looked at his hands and shook his head. "It was right there," he said softly. "On a shelf, halfway down a wall." The mountain had hidden a secret, but the metal had kept a truth. In court, the prosecutor spoke like a builder, one piece at a time. The phone calls that went unanswered, the empty campsite, the dead-end river search, the ledge discovery from a single frame of video, the empty cab, the bumper grooves, the gray epoxy, the GPS logs on the old server, the service road no map showed, the sudden bumper replacement, the lease at the pump station, the hidden room, the rescue, and the grave in the woods. She did not raise her voice. She did not use dramatic words. She put each fact down and let it sit. The defense argued coincidence. They said the paint wasn't unique. They said the GPS could be off. They said a deer could bend a bumper. They said the room was just storage and could have been used by anyone. They said there was no confession, no camera at the cliff, no witness at the push. They said reasonable doubt is not a feeling, but a standard. The jury asked to see the photos again. They looked at the scrape marks and the straightness of the lines. They looked at the map where the fleet truck dot sat at the cliff, then near the campsite. They looked at the maintenance sheet with the sudden bumper change. They did not need a written confession. The metal had spoken. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed. The judge spoke about choices and harm that cannot be undone. The sentence was life without parole. There was no apology for "I'm the man who had stayed quiet from the moment he dropped the pipe." The sheriff's office closed the file with a rubber stamp that felt too small for what the pages contained. People went back to their lives slowly, like walking on new ice, careful, testing each step. Life did not snap back. It moved in slow circles. The rescue was both a relief and a shock. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning how to live alongside memory. At home, Sarah took down maps and folded them carefully. Mark put the milk crate of search papers in the garage, but not too far back. A counselor came on Mondays and sat at the kitchen table with a warm voice. She taught new habits. She said 2 things can be true at the same time: relief and grief. She said healing can be slow and still be real. She said safety is a feeling and a practice. She said the future isn't a single road. One cold morning, sun lay thin on the grass. Sarah picked up Tessa's purple backpack and hung it on a hook by the door. Tessa watched from the table, hands around a mug of hot chocolate. Steam made little ghosts above the cup. She looked at the hook, then at the window. She didn't smile. She gave a small nod. Yes, that, there. It was not a movie moment. It was a small sign. Small signs matter. At the sheriff's office, someone pinned a copy of the Ridge Topo to a corkboard and circled the ledge in red. A folder got a quiet nickname, the ledge that wouldn't let go. New deputies learn from it. Check for roads maps, ignore. Follow paint when stories don't add up. Pull old data even if it looks dead. Listen when a family says the phone ringing feels wrong. Lessons written in quiet, not loud. The rope team went back to other jobs. Roofs, towers, lines. The diver took a few weeks off and then returned to the water. The wingsuit flyer, Nolan, drove past those cliffs on his way to another range and did not stop. He waved. "Head at the ridgeline anyway." Sometimes respect looks like passing by. If you stand on that ledge on a still day, and you shouldn't, you can see a thin road cutting across the valley and a river that minds its own business. From up there, you can almost believe that gravity decides everything. But the truth is simpler and harder. People decide. Someone drove a truck to a hidden road, lined up behind it with a strong bar, and pushed until air took over. Someone built a room in an old pump station and taught silence how to feel like normal. Someone else watched the sky through a lens, paused a single frame, and told a story that finally made sense. Years later, in another kitchen, in another house, a phone rang. Someone answered on the second ring. "I'm running late," the voice said. "I'll text if I'm out of service." "Okay," the person said, and stuck a note to a fridge with a polka dot magnet. Not the same magnet, just a rhyme in the world of objects. "Back tomorrow after breakfast, one night only." The kettle began to boil. Outside the night held steady. Birds settled in dark trees. Somewhere far away a cliff faced the wind. A narrow ledge sat quiet. The secret it had kept now part of a lesson pinned to a corkboard in a room with coffee that never tastes very good. We can't ask rock to be kind. Rock remembers pressure and time, but we can ask people to look closer. We can ask them to check the old data, to test what paint can tell, to walk one more mile down a road that doesn't show on any tourist map. We can ask them to listen when someone says, "This feels wrong," and act while the kettle is still hot. Secrets don't keep forever, not even on ledges halfway down a mountain that thought it could hide everything. And as the wind settles over the ridge, one truth remains. Metal doesn't forget, and neither do we. The next case is already calling. Keep watching the Witness Archives.